Summer, we asked if Europe was ready for winter. Now, is Europe ready for hybrid warfare? Swedish authorities reporting a fourth leak on the Nord Stream pipelines that connect Russia to Germany via the Baltic Sea. The EU calls Monday's explosions sabotage. Poland and Ukraine blame Russia. Moscow asks, why would we do billions in damage to our own pipelines? 4 days on, we're still asking, who done it and why? Coincidence of the calendar, this was the week the new Baltic pipe link between Norway and Poland via Denmark was inaugurated. How vulnerable is Europe's energy infrastructure to an eventual attack when EU ministers stage an emergency transport, telecommunications and energy council Friday in Brussels? They'll be working on ways to keep the power on this winter and stay a step ahead of Vladimir Putin. Beyond sanctions and talk of price caps, does that bubble of methane gas in the Baltic Sea signal the end of Europeans investing in Russia? With what consequences? Today in the France 24 debate, are we ready for hybrid warfare? Joining us from Stuttgart, German Green member of the European Parliament, Michael Bloss. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello.
Famke Krummüller, geostrategist at EY Parthenon, the consultants. Thanks for being with us as well.
Hi.
Energy analyst Philippe Charles of the Sapiens Institute think tank. Welcome back.
Good evening. Thank you.
And from Brussels, Ben McWilliams, a climate and energy policy analyst at the Bruegel Institute think tank. Nice to see you.
Hi, good evening.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, fourth leak on the Nord Stream pipelines. The Swedish Coast Guard confirming 2 of the leaks on the Russian-owned Nord Stream 2 pipeline inside of Sweden's economic zone. The other 2 on Nord Stream 1 in the Danish economic zone. The Scandinavian neighbors talk of sabotage, but for now taking very good care not to lay blame without proof. Vedika Bael has more.
As the EU says that the leaks in major gas pipelines between Russia and Europe are the result of sabotage, many questions remain unanswered. According to experts, only a handful of countries have the capacity to commit such acts, and it may take weeks to investigate due to high gas pressure in the pipes.
It is crucial now that Europe and NATO stand together. We have to find out what happened and who was behind it. It may take some time.
However, the 27-strong union isn't waiting to step up to the plate, saying any new attack on the bloc will be met with a strong and united response.
What happened was in international waters. It's an attack on European energy infrastructure, European energy security, close to our borders, and that's something we will respond to in solidarity in Europe.
In the meantime, the Europeans want to ensure safety moving forward. Firstly, security and surveillance will be strengthened around both Norway's land and offshore oil and gas installations. New sabotage could have catastrophic effects for the EU, which with winter approaching is already struggling to cover its energy needs. Denmark will extend this vigilance across its energy sector to all at-risk infrastructures. And Sweden has since opened an investigation into what they've called the aggravated sabotage. Russia has denied any involvement, calling the accusations predictable, stupid and absurd, but also saying that wasting Russian gas would be costing them money. Moscow has instead pointed the finger at Washington for the leaks and asked for a UN Security Council meeting, which will take place this Friday.
Ben McWilliams, you heard leaders in that report choosing their words carefully. First off, about where these attacks took place. Is it international waters? Is it economic zone waters? Is it attack on sovereign territory?
Exactly. And European leaders, while calling this out directly as sabotage, are very afraid or are not yet willing to call this Russian sabotage, whether that may be the case. When we look at it, it seems on the surface strange that Russia would do this. The Nord Stream 1 pipeline and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was not yet opened, are the crown and the jewels of Russian energy export business. So why would you blow up your own pipelines? And it didn't seem to make sense. On the other hand, of course, since February 24th, there's not been a lot of rational action from the Kremlin. And these kind of accidents and incidents on pipelines have been frequently used by the Kremlin, by Gazprom, to justify cuts in gas flows to Europe. The main reason being that they're tied into lots of long-term contracts with European companies. And if they stop sending the gas, they have to pay big sums of money to get out of these contracts. So what it's nice to be able to do is to declare force majeure, which is potentially one reason why this might make sense and why we've seen in the past leaks into the pipeline, oil leaks. We've seen turbines supposedly not working, paperwork being in the wrong place. So it fits into a narrative, but EU leaders are just justifiably so reluctant to immediately cast blame on who this is until there can be a further investigation.
For now, it's too dangerous to go down below for investigators. Partner station France Télévisions spoke to a former director of French military intelligence. He outlined two scenarios. The first one, drones launched from a submarine.
The drone is attached to the superstructure outside of the hull of the submarine, in which case it can be unlocked using a simple system. From there it can move and deliver the explosives to their target.
The second option would be a diver from a sub planting devices. Philippe Charles, your thoughts on what happened?
First of all, I would say that it's clearly a sabotage and it has nothing to do with a technical problem, given the intensity of the leak, because several million of, even billion of cubic meter after reduction of pressure have been released in the sea. So it's a huge damage to the pipeline. How does it happen? Difficult to say, but you have to know that the water depth is approximately 100 meters. And so it's difficult to envisage that it's divers, because at this depth it's difficult for divers to survive for reasons. And so I am more in favor, not necessarily a drone, but what is called ROV, which means remote operation vehicle, which is in fact very commonly used in offshore oil operation, which consists in fact in a sort of robot, and this robot can weld, can depose something, and so it can be operated, yes, from a submarine, but even from a surface boat which has been demarked from military colors. It could happen. However, it means that it required a certain number of heavy equipment and also sophisticated crew to operate such an operation. So first of all, we cannot think about, for instance, terrorism, classical terrorism. It's absolutely impossible. So some military means have to be behind this operation.
And you heard Ben McWilliams spell out a possible motive, which is Gazprom, which operates the pipeline, which has contracts to honor, can say, look, we can't send you the gas anymore because force majeure.
It can be an hypothesis, effectively. We know that Putin has already used, but I prefer my colleague specialist in politics to speak about that. But we know that he have used in the past already such a strategy to create itself a problem, to report the problem to someone else. And so he can say effectively in the winter, I was in favor to give gas, but of course the pipe is not operational, so I can't.
Famke Krummüller?
Yes, I mean, it is, of course, at this stage important that we stay careful in terms of trying to understand who this was. We don't know. If indeed it was something linked to a state actor, maybe the Russian state, then what we need to understand, I think, is that if it came from that side, it might have been about simply sending a signal that Russia is willing to escalate the current situation further.
Because this is coming right at the same time as the referendums that took place in occupied parts of Ukraine, mobilization taking place in Russia to raise a notch the scale of the war?
It's true that the timing is interesting. I think you mentioned also already the other pipeline soon going online. So timing is very interesting. the main reading would be there is, of course, I think, as we all know, a problem around European energy security. Russia is willing to escalate this further. This is one event. We don't know to whom it's tied, but they have demonstrated before that they are willing to weaponize energy supply to Europe. And I think that's the main thing that we need to keep in mind.
Earlier, we heard some dramatic words out of Berlin as the German government announced a 200 billion euro plan to offset the cost of surging energy prices. The finance minister gave a blunt take on the significance of this moment.
We are in an energy war for prosperity and freedom. After the sabotage by a yet unknown actor in the Baltic Sea, the situation has become even worse.
Michael Bloss, are we in an energy war? And if so, an energy war with whom?
For sure, we are in such an energy war. Russia is using gas as a weapon from the very beginning, and even before the war against Ukraine started. They are trying to push the prices up to create social problems in the European Union, to create problems for the enterprises in the European Union. And this is what we are suffering already right now. And therefore, the German government today announced a huge support package of 200 billion euros in order to support ordinary citizens, but also our companies.
And do ordinary citizens, are they lockstep with that concept, an energy war?
Well, I think if you look onto your energy bills and you see that they quadruple, even normal families, they are not able to afford their energy bills anymore. This is a huge problem for everyone. Some of those who were barely making it in the months now do not have money maybe after 2 weeks in the month. So yeah, I mean, everyone understands that we are in extraordinary circumstances and we have to do something about it. So now we have this support package, but what really needs to happen is we need to become independent of Russian energy. We need to become also independent more of outside energy imports and really go to produce our own energy in the European Union, because that's the safest way and that's the way it does not create dependencies on others. It's the energy of freedom.
Yeah, that's the medium to long-term plan. The short-term plan is making it through winter. The Danish press reports Total Energy, the French energy giant, observing unauthorized drone activity on Wednesday near one of its offshore oil and gas installations in the North Sea. And this follows the Norwegian press on Monday, warning of drone activity. Several instances of it. The Norwegian Petroleum Safety Authority warning vessels and rigs to be on the lookout. Norwegian police have launched investigations. The U.S. Energy Secretary, she's also warning energy infrastructure operators to be on high alert. Jennifer Granholm asked by the Bloomberg News Agency whether U.S. Liquefied natural gas shipments to Europe also need to take more precautions. Quote, of course, we have to be on heightened alert. Ben McWilliams, is the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, are they the new Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not sure we can go this far. If it becomes the case, then I mean, if this is proven as a Russian attack, or if there are further, this is a Russian attack on a NATO country, on NATO territory, which of course has dramatic and incredible consequences. So let's hope that we're not in this scenario. What can be said, though, however, is that Europe's energy system at the moment is so tight. All of the supply side elasticities are used up. We're running everything we can at max capacity. And that's what makes events like this, where the Nord Stream pipeline was actually empty. Well, it wasn't empty, it had gas in, but it wasn't any more coming to Europe. So technically, it didn't change things in the short run, but just the unease of it in the markets can still influence prices. And that's a big challenge for Europe going into the winter. Potentially this hybrid warfare, but also natural disasters. US LNG, you mentioned natural gas coming from the States. It's becoming hurricane season over there. any small outages over there, any small disruptions to the energy market supplying Europe at the moment has big consequences on prices, and that's the challenge that we're in and the scenario we need to live through this winter.
Philippe Chalez, has this always been the case, only before the general public didn't pay attention to energy supply lines, but now suddenly we're all paying attention? Or are we in uncharted territory?
I would say it depend on the region. They were very careful, for instance, some years ago when there were war in the Middle East, for instance, but currently in the North Sea, for instance, no, there was no special care because there was never a special attack on infrastructure. I think it's really the first time in European infrastructure. However, we have to know that the Nord Stream 1, we see here the picture, supply a third of the gas to Europe. That is approximately 55 billion of cubic meter per year. And so it means that with this attack, to repair such a pipeline, it will take probably several months because it's huge works asking to mobilize very heavy boat and equipment. And so we have now to work with the two other pipelines. And the two other pipelines is one pipeline through Ukraine, the Brotherhood, and the second one is the pipeline through Belarus, which is the Yamal. From Belarus, of course, it can work, and these two pipelines can bring approximately 100 BCM. But currently we lose definitively a third of the possible supply, even if the last weeks this pipeline were not operational. The Nord Stream 1 was not operational. It's in fact only the capacity of the pipeline which is under pressure because to avoid the pipe to collapse, that has been released, the gas inside the pipeline which has been released, but there was no flow rate. So I am more and more worried about the providing of gas to Europe for winter, because the only possibility we discussed already is natural liquefied gas, and the quantity of natural liquefied gas cannot replace all the gas coming from Russia.
And how about the inauguration of this new pipeline from Norway to Poland via Denmark?
It's not only the problem of pipe, it's the problem to fill the pipe, that we have enough gas to fill the pipe. It's also the question with Algeria. Algeria could send, because the pipe is not full.
It announced new contracts with Spain and Italy on Wednesday.
Yeah, first of all, but the capacity of Algeria to produce more gas is very limited. It would require some development and some improvement of the field, which would take several years. You have to never forget that energy is a business of long time.
Yeah, you can't. It's not overnight. You can snap your fingers. Let me ask you, Michael Bloss. We had statements on Wednesday by the head of Total Energy, Patrick Pouyanné, spelling out what he saw as the natural gas strategy for that energy giant, saying it'll be less Russia, more Qatar, and more yes. He said less Russia. He didn't say no Russia. Is he right to speak like that when you hear Philippe Chalez talk about the immediate urgency here?
No, I don't think that Russia is a reliable partner, and I think any company that still counts on Russia is going for a high-risk strategy. It was, well, I mean, as it was already said.
So you're saying never again do business with Russia and buying natural gas?
Yes, I think so. Well, and this is because of two reasons. The first reason is we saw what happened if you rely on Russia. Russia is using its energy, its gas, but also its oil and coal as a weapon, as a means for its own interest. And secondly, we are still fueling the war against Ukraine. We are still sending billions of euros to Russia, and Russia can fill its coffers to pay for weaponry, to pay their soldiers in Ukraine, and we should not do that. And we also shouldn't do that once I hope the Ukrainian won this war because, well, probably it will be still Putin there, maybe not. Maybe that's a new situation. But yeah, we should not rely on Russia and we should not give them money.
Ben McWilliams, it's been 2 decades since there was the Yukos affair. The oil and gas industry knows the risks of doing business in Russia. So do leaders in Western chancelleries, and yet that continued. Do you agree with what you've just heard from Michael Bloss?
I would agree that Russia is no longer a reliable energy partner for Europe.
Never again?
I think that Europe needs to be ready to survive without any Russian energy. That needs to be the baseline. We need to be completely independent of Russian gas. And then Russian pipelines will still sit there. Russia will still sit on gas. And when we come from a position of strength, we can say to Russia, we've already diversified. We've got new LNG import terminals. We're better connected. We're shifting even away from gas. You have all this gas sitting there. You cannot send it anywhere else. You can't send it to China because it's stuck in the Western gas fields. We will pay you at a very, very low price. The European Union will negotiate this at a very low price for your gas. Take it or leave it. And then we say, we're independent. If you want to keep selling us in the future, we can negotiate with you, but the baseline has to be independence.
That's a principled position, but Philippe Charles is saying there's a problem getting through this winter.
There is a problem getting through this winter. Europe will have to reduce gas by about 15%. That's a situation caused by Russia and Russia cutting the gas exports to Europe. It's at the moment not Europe who's deciding to cut imports from Russia. And the solution this winter has to be a coordinated reduction of demand across Europe of about 15%, continuing to maximize other supply side options, whether that be potentially boosting gas in the Netherlands, other power options around Europe, and working together as one bloc, continuing to trade energy across the bloc to get through this winter.
All right, here in France, they're weighing mandatory energy-saving measures as a possibility and strongly encouraging everyone to turn down the thermostat as the way to get through the winter. The finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, tweeting a picture of himself wearing a turtleneck sweater, while the Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, donned a puffy jacket on Wednesday to visit a factory north of Paris that's set to make hydrogen storage tanks for cars. Good optics, I suppose, Famke Krummuller. But first off, your thoughts on how the messaging is going in the high halls of power with common citizens who, again, have to pay those bills.
I actually think that might be one of the main challenges going through this winter. The consequences of the high prices of energy that feed through to inflation, of course, which starts to increasingly feed through to household bills, not just the energy bills, of which in a lot of European countries there have been measures by governments to cushion this, but actually, first of all, to business. A lot of businesses being heavily hit by this, actually needing to shut down if they're energy intensive, don't manage to be competitive anymore on the international stage. But also then, of course, consumers that get the prices through higher retail prices, et cetera, that I can see the risk of these groups taking the streets in certain European countries and starting to say we cannot afford these bills and we want action from our leaders. What will that look like when, for example, further sanctions on Russia get undermined in a context where there might be more escalation in the war? I think that there is a real risk of much more political instability coming from the streets going through this.
Okay, so how does the West steel itself for that political instability?
I mean, that's the challenge. I think communication is indeed key.
Turtleneck sweaters?
But the problem is that once, and this is very well known, once prices really hit the consumer and they feel it in their own pocket, they're on average, they care much less about bigger values and maybe defending people in another country, etc. They cannot or don't want to afford prices feeding through, and that's when we get a real problem. Reminder that the Gilets jaunes in France at the time started because of fuel price increase, right?
Yeah, it's with a carbon tax that was scrapped. Philippe Charles, you know the old saying, the French want communism for everyone else and capitalism for themselves. If this idea of perhaps mandatory regulation, telling businesses to turn down their ventilation systems, this kind of thing, and how will that Can that work? I mean,
I think again that the dependency of France, according to Russia, in terms of gas, is relatively low. So I told you last time that it was in the range of 3%. 3% of the French energy depends on the Russian gas, and so I think that with a minimum of effort, we can effectively compensate with some economy this lack of gas.
Yeah, the government said if everybody makes a voluntary effort to cut down by 15% their energy consumption.
It doesn't need 15% in France, but it needs 15% in Europe, which is completely different because the 3% of France is 16% in Germany. And so behind all this measure, it means that there is a sort of European solidarity. And so is this European solidarity, which is promoted by politics, is it acceptable for people? I am not so sure, because when you discuss, for instance, with French people, they say that the German, for instance, has a huge responsibility on the current energy situation, and so they have to solve themselves. I don't think, it's not my feeling and my way of thinking, but I think that a lot of people will think that, and effectively, if you impose a solidarity at the expense of people, you have effectively a big risk of a new Gilets jaunes scenario.
It always goes back to European solidarity. I mean, now again, the challenge is that the EU agrees, and on average, the response will be much more efficient, though, if there is an EU-level agreement on how to tackle this crisis. We can see it now, what's happening. Because it's difficult to agree at the EU level, some member states are taking national measures. Two challenges. Of course, the energy markets are different across member states and there are different dynamics, but also in terms of, from a political perspective, agreeing is challenging in this environment.
Yeah, that brings us to that Friday meeting of energy ministers, Michael Bloss. I know that one of the issues that they're trying to get a consensus around is common pooling the purchases of power. Do you see that Europe making headway on Friday when those energy ministers sit down?
Well, we will see tomorrow, but I wanted to go back to this question of European unity. I completely shared the analysis that this is a huge problem for European societies, and solidarity will be key. But also we have to see that this is actually the strategy of Putin. Putin wants Europe to be divided in order to win his war, and we as the EU must not forget that this is not a war against Ukraine, that there is no reason to think that Putin would stop if he would get Ukraine. So this is about the EU's security as a whole, and that kind of makes it necessary for us to come with common solution and to be in solidarity. Otherwise, if we are separated, it's a big problem also on the long term in a geopolitical way. So what I think needs to happen is we need to work together. And one thing is that the Asian gas prices are much lower than the ones in Europe. Why is that? Because in Europe, everyone is buying gas by themselves. You know, Chancellor Scholz going to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, and in this way, we are pushing the prices up on the European level. If we go to the world market as one single buyer, we have a huge negotiation power and can bring prices down. I think it should be a no-brainer. It needs to happen, but unfortunately, still it's difficult. And the second thing, what they are discussing is of the question of a gas price cap. So as it was just explained, that Europe just says, okay, we will not pay more than a certain amount of money for gas, which I think is bit of a difficult thing, because if gas prices are higher than what Europe wants to pay for, then it means Europe doesn't get any gas, and this will be a problem, maybe not for countries like France so much, but for those who are highly dependent on gas. Then possibly in Europe we need to share the gas, and we have this kind of we do not have enough. This means some companies would need to shut down. So I think it's really necessary that we come to common solutions tomorrow, and we act together, because if we fail to act together, I think Putin wins.
Ben McWilliams, what's the easy win that Europe can announce?
Sure. Maybe one very brief comment first, if you allow me, on the situation in France, where I would argue that France does still need to cut energy significantly. I agree with Philippe on the gas front, but the big challenge in France is the nuclear reactors. Half of France's nuclear reactors are currently off. They're not working, they're under maintenance. And this means that France is importing lots and lots of electricity from other countries who burn gas to produce this electricity, so from Belgium and Spain. So in France, the big thing is reducing power demand, reducing electricity demand. And the big win, the big focus that needs to be at the European level is still on demand reduction. This has been the message for the last months, and it's getting clearer and clearer at the European level. This is being pushed. So on the gas side, we have an agreement to reduce gas demand by 15%. And now in the electricity sector, there are also discussions, which should be tomorrow, on proposing a coordinated demand cut in electricity generation over the next months, probably of around 10%. And that's the big win, and that's the big message to markets. If European leaders can come together and agree this, that's the biggest thing I'm looking for tomorrow.
So that's interesting what you're saying, Ben. You're not saying, hey, France, fix your nuclear power plants. You're saying consume less energy.
Fixing the power plants would be perfect, but this takes time, and EDF has said it takes a few months for this to come on. But that being the case, power and gas are very closely interlinked. The two go closely together, and if France can reduce its power demand as it needs to, then this helps out neighbouring countries burning less gas. And on the discussion of solidarity, this is the same across all of Europe. Germany is in a bad position with gas. Other countries are struggling for other reasons. That's why, as other panelists have already mentioned, the European Union solution and the solidarity, allowing energy to be traded, is the solution that gets us through at least cost through this winter, and something that needs to be negotiated.
Michael Bloss, the German economy ministers from your party on this week on Wednesday, stating that it looks like 2 nuclear power plants that were meant to shut could stay open for the winter. If we're talking about European solidarity, why not just go out and announce, yes, we're going to keep those nuclear power plants open?
Yeah, because it's not that easy, and it's actually, unfortunately, an act of European solidarity, because, as it was just mentioned, the French nuclear power plants do not work. Currently, actually in Germany, we run gas power plants, produce electricity from gas in order to also supply France at times. So this is a huge problem. I mean, the nuclear technology apparently is not as reliable as everybody says. But the reason is that if we would want to run it longer than the 2 or 3 months, we need to get new fuel. It takes a lot of time to get new fuel, and also all of the security checks would have to be done in this power plant, because they haven't been done, I think, for 9 years. Normally they should be done every 5 years. So that would mean that these power plants would not produce electricity for maybe half a year, and that wouldn't help us at winter at all. So the best thing is now to use the remaining fuel, prolong it for 2 or 3 months, and then we are through winter. Actually, it probably is not. We don't even do that because of the electricity. The electricity generated from it is very small. It's because of the grid stability, because we do not get the supply from France as we normally get in winter. So this is the reason why it has probably been longer. But nuclear is not the solution. I'm sorry to say that in France, one cut, but it will not help us. It's unreliable. If you want to build new ones, it takes 12 years. We need to and this is also what I'm really missing in this debate since the war started. We really need to now focus on immediate outroll of renewable energy, of more renewable energy, of renovations, all of these things, energy efficiency that can actually really help us to become less dependent from Russia. They are, to my understanding, not as much in the focus as they should be.
But there have been big plans, Famke Krummeler, rolled out by the European Commission, by the new French government. Are they not, or are they not ambitious enough?
Definitely.
26 onwards or so. I mean, it doesn't help us now. It helps us maybe in 5 years, but that's much too long.
I quickly wanted to add on the importance of reducing demand is also that if it's not done on a voluntary, let's say more or less proactive basis by everybody, if we don't have enough energy, there will be forced rationing. That will then impact certain industries, most importantly, that will just have to shut down or reduce production. And that is the consequence. It doesn't mean that if we just don't meet that, there will be a miraculous solution. Right?
And small businesses here in France are already feeling the pinch.
I think everywhere businesses are feeling it because obviously they're seeing their bills go up, but also some are actually already being forced to shut down because they are just less competitive compared to their international producers. That's one thing. On the EU plans, obviously Repower EU was announced before the summer, and that is about more structurally reducing demand. It's about accelerating investment into renewable energies. Obviously, there are two parts to the story. It's the immediate / short-term story, how to get through this winter, maybe the next one, and then it's the more structural effort. Back to what we discussed before about structurally diversifying away from Russia. I think that has started, and that is a one-way street.
Philippe Chalès?
Yes, first of all,
is there strength in numbers here? There has to be an EU-wide solution?
First of all, I think that a reduction of consumption of 15% will induce a huge recession in Europe. Remember that
you shut down industry,
the first lockdown, it was minus 10% in energy. It's minus 7% in terms of economic growth. So it means that I would say a comfortable reduction of 15% of energy, it will not happen. This is the first.
Yeah, but if I turn the thermostat down, wear a sweater, that doesn't reduce.
It will not represent 15%. I'm sorry.
Right, not enough.
When you reach 15%, it means that you touch deeply in the strong economy. The second thing, of course, I fully disagree with the fact that renewable is the solution. Renewable is not the solution. Nuclear is not a universal solution too, but it's the mixture between the two that is probably the best solution. I heard that Germany today is hugely consuming gas to manufacture electricity. It's because they closed the nuclear, and they cannot prolong by a few months the nuclear because it has not been maintained for 9 years. So we see the result, and effectively we see that the energy structure in Europe is a complete failure.
Famke Krummüller?
I just want to come back to the first part about the recession. I mean, if the current trend with energy prices continues or it gets worse, which is possible, then I think a recession in Europe at the beginning of next year is something that is inevitable. And whether that comes from shutting down industry or from reducing demand, I guess that's it leads to the same result. So saying we won't reduce consumption because it will create a recession, I think is not the right follow through. That's something that in the current situation is already very difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult for all of Europe, and we've seen those plans like the 200 billion, it's called an energy shield, rolled out by Germany this Thursday. The soaring heating and electricity bills felt all over. Top of the list of countries on this continent who've seen their rates soar is not an EU member. It's the UK, which also announced a plan to subsidize households and businesses. Their government's circling the wagons for different reasons over tax cuts for the rich. But yeah, either way, even if you're not Liz Truss's government, Benwick Williams, deficits are still going to surge. Your thoughts on what's the best way forward in terms of A, the mix as described there by Philippe Chalès, and B, again, this concept of where we should push in the medium term, because as has been spelled out by several panelists in this conversation, if you're changing strategies, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time.
Sure. Beginning with the UK energy policy and fiscal situation at the moment, the two are closely linked. Part of the reason for markets seeing the pound weakly is this promise to simultaneously cut taxes massively and also implement a price cap on the import of energy or energy in the UK, with the government footing the bill. So the government going into the market and purchasing gas and power at any price and fixing the price for consumers, which of course sounds nice and it's politically attractive to say this to people. But the bottom line is the government has a huge, I think it's estimated up to £200 billion bill at the end of the day. Short to medium term, what can be done? To clarify this demand reduction of 15%, this isn't something that Europe's being asked to do or we or anybody else is saying to Europe, you should do this to make the winter better. This is just a physical fact. There will not be the molecules in Europe of gas to consume the same as last year. Europe will consume 15% less because the molecules won't be there. The question, as I think Famke already alluded to, is how we achieve this 15% reduction. And that's where we'll see how deep the recession, if and increasingly looks likely there will be one, is achieved. If we can do the things such as turning the thermostats down slightly, rapidly deploying energy efficiency measures where possible, then we can limit the impact on industry and on vulnerable consumers. If we don't do those things, then ultimately high prices will continue to have an effect and they'll kick out industry. That's what we've seen in August. Industry is consuming very little gas because prices are so high, and that's what will cause the recession. So it's not a question about the magnitude of the demand reduction, it's a question of how we do this and if we can do it in a coordinated, sensible manner.
In a coordinated, sensible manner. Michael Bloss, again, it's this idea that if there aren't enough molecules of gas to go around, how do you get through the winter?
No, I completely agree. I mean, that is already happening. And by the way, the rationing is also just due to the high prices. We see already some companies shutting down, not because there are no molecules, but just because it's not profitable for them anymore to produce. It's actually better for them not to produce. So this is already happening. I would say, I mean, in winter, 70% of the gas consumption in Germany is private households for heating, 30% is industry. So I think private households can actually do a lot. So it is about saving, and it's also about insulating our houses. And there's also short-term measures that can be done, and we haven't really looked at them yet, so we need to focus on them. I just wanted to bring in another thing. I think it's absolutely clear that we need to support households, we need to support companies. And we should be very careful in how to program it, because what we should not do is now take a lot of taxpayers' money, a lot of state money, and just give it to the gas companies and basically make fossil subsidies, make gas then more cheap, and in this way incentivize the use of gas, because that's exactly what we do not want. We do not want to incentivize the use of gas. What we should be doing is, as it's already planned, really take the super profits of the gas companies, of the energy companies, and redistribute it to those who need it most. Best would be direct payment, European energy money, and support them in this way. But the incentives to save gas needs to stay. So what has been done wrong, for instance, in Spain was they just subsidized gas, and gas consumption then went up again. And this is just like, then taxpayers' money in the mouth of the fossils without any kind of long-term effect, and it would be really bad for us for going out of the recession. It wouldn't work.
All right, so give the subsidy money directly to households that need it most, is what you're saying. Michael Bloss, I want to thank you so much for joining us today from Stuttgart. Ben McWilliams in Brussels. I also want to thank Philippe Charles, Famke Kruppmüller. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.